Back to Management Live, Wobie on Innovation, New York City, 2014. Let's welcome our next speaker to our stage. Juan Enriquez is one of the world's leading authorities on the incredible impact that life sciences are having on business, technology, and society. Learn how the bioscience decoding of the human genome really works and how it's generating innovations across every industry.
So you have this huge disruption of the very largest companies. You have entirely new technologies coming in, and most of that has been driven by digital code. So what happened over the last 30 years is most of the large businesses on the planet, most of the things that you came up with in the second slide in this presentation, what are the largest US companies that didn't exist? The Microsofts and the Facebooks and the eBays and the Googles and the Zyngas and the this and the that. They all had to do with this transition from a world of ABCs into a world of ones and zeros. In fact, the top 10 fastest growing sectors in the United States for the last 10 years has had to do with the digital sector. Things like video games all of a sudden are much larger than Hollywood. A video game release is larger than any movie sitting out there, like by a large chunk. But now we're going through another transition, and that transition is a transition from reading and writing in ones and zeros, which has collapsed every word written and spoken in English into 2 8 letters, 1 and 0, and Spanish and French and Aramaic, and every language you've ever spoken. And it's also collapsed every photograph from chemistry into digits, and it's collapsed every bit of music from instruments into digits, and it's collapsed every film, it's collapsed every video. Okay, so it's been a transition in this alphabet in how we execute stuff, how we execute code from violin, from speak it and write it into ones and zeros, just strings of this stuff. And now what we're doing is we're beginning to transition into reading, copying, editing life in the same way. So what does this mean? It means that every life form on this planet is coded in what we call a double helix, discovered by Watson and Crick, and the argument is this thing that looks like a spiral staircase is based on 4 chemicals, adenine, threonine, guanine, cytosine. And if you stick those chemicals into a gene sequencing machine, then you can write wildly boring books, right? Because you get the gene code, the genome of this stuff. So this is an operating system for life. If you cut a hard drive on a computer, or if you cut a computer chip, you'd see 3.2 billion transistors in the latest Intel PC chip. This thing's the same thing, right? Except this operates life code. It's got a little bit of energy around it, so instead of plugging in electricity, what you've got here is you've got a whole bunch of organic matter, but the core of this thing are the little seeds at the center. And what this thing does is it's sitting on a lemon tree, and one day it says, it's time, and then the lemon goes plunk. And when the lemon goes plunk, it begins to execute life code that looks like those ATCGs. And if you go through that string of ATCG, the first line says ATACA, and that means make a little root. And the second line says TCAAGG, and that means make a little stem. GTCA, make some leaves. AGC, make some flowers. GCA, make some lemons. Now think of this as translating it into English. If I send you an email and the email reads after I text it, I love you, you're going to get a very different reaction if you send I hate you. Right? You're still sending the same number of letters. They're still almost in the same order. But the reaction's very different depending on those 4 letters in the middle. And it's the same thing with this lemon, right? So if I take the ATCGs in this lemon, and I take the operating system, and I take out one of the seeds, and I change the lines of gene code in this, and instead of reading ATACC, it reads GTAC, then this lemon becomes a lime. And if I say GCAA, then it becomes a grapefruit. Or if I say AGCA, then maybe it becomes an entirely different type of fruit. Same thing with a human being. You've all got 3.2 billion letters of gene code, which is called the human genome, in each of your cells. And that's your operating code. And it says, build eyes, build stomach, build bone, make my hair brown or yellow. Difference between you and the person sitting next to you today is 1 in 1,000 of those letters. So you change 1 in 1,000, you become your neighbor today. Be more careful where you sit next time. What that implies is life turns out to be code. If life is code, the same rules that apply to English, French, digital code, German, Chinese, they all apply to life. What does that mean? In practical terms, it means we can read, we can copy, and we can edit. You can read a book, you can read a chapter in a book, you can read a sentence in a book, you can edit a sentence, you can copy a sentence, you can copy a book. And now let me show you what that means in practical terms and what disruption looks like at the edges of a network. So 6 odd years ago, maybe a little bit more, these two guys and I and one of the lead IP lawyers in the US, David Kiernan, were sitting in a bar in Virginia called Landini's. And after about 3 scotches late at night, we started dreaming and said, you know, what you do with a computer chip is it really doesn't matter what you're running through there as long as it's in ones and zeros. So the computer chip really doesn't care whether you're doing a spreadsheet, whether you're doing due diligence, whether you're sending a love letter, whether you're browsing the web, whether you're looking at pictures, whatever you're doing, as long as what you're running through that chip is in ones and zeros. What would happen if we could design a cell to execute life code and it didn't matter what the cell was trying to make? So could you make a synthetic cell? So we raised some money, put together a company. It helps when the guy who's standing up is Craig Venter, who sequenced the human genome. The guy who's sitting down is Ham Smith, who won the Nobel for figuring out how to split and stitch genes. And about 3 or 4 years later, we were able to take this picture. Why does this picture matter? Because it's the first time that we've transformed one living organism into an entirely different species. So we've taken the gene code out of the first organism and turned it into a different species, which some people thought was a big deal. In fact, it may be the world's first programmable cell. And as you think about that stuff and what it means to have a programmable cell, it means that in the same ways you can program a computer chip, you can program a cell to make stuff. So you can take algae and begin to engineer algae and give the instruction code to that algae to say, in addition to doing what you normally do, please also do this. And the neat thing is, once you do that, then it grows into this. And then you put it into our greenhouse in La Jolla, and it grows into this. And then we put it in little tubes, and we come back a few days later, and guess what? This software makes its own hardware. That's a big deal. No matter how I program my computer, it's not going to make 1,000 computers by the morning. But if I program life code, it scales. And if you think the last 30 years were disruptive, if you think there was a lot of change in the last 30 years because we transitioned to digital code, the transition to life code is going to be pretty spectacular.
This fascinating speech really shows how new technologies are leading